Welcome to the LEC post-game lobby. I'm Quickshot, joined by Froskurinn and Mac. First of all, thank you so much for joining us, Mac. And fortunately, we get to speak to a member of the number one Thai team in the league after dropping a game for the first time in 4 weeks. Mac, let's start with what went wrong.
Well, sometimes they just get you, right? Like today they played. I mean, there are plenty of things that you can prepare for, right? There's all the preparation in the world that you can do, but realistically, I think it's probably not within normal expectations for us to know that Fiddlesticks is going to take Spellbook. They're going to blind pick Fiddlesticks jungle, and he's going to teleport behind my bot lane when we're swapping for Herald, right? Like that's very, very, very hard for us to anticipate. And yeah, they got us. Good job, Misfits.
I'm kind of picking up from there, Mac. When I look at Mad Lions, you guys have lost to only G2 and Misfits, and I see these teams as not necessarily playing the same style, but being more of that skirmish-oriented, willing to fight you all the time type of style. Do you think that if any team was going to beat the Mad Lions, that they would have to employ a style like this? Do you think like a Origin or a Rogue or kind of the other side of the LEC could do the same thing?
I think yes, basically. I think teams, we're the type of team that's always willing to fight you, right? And if you're not always willing to fight the other team, then you're eventually just going to give up these like little small victories, because people like to do things like bluffing on a wave and walking up and playing a game of chicken, right? And if you're not willing to play chicken sometimes, then sometimes you miss out on opportunities.
I actually want to just dive straight into that. This was one of the most entertaining games I have seen in a while, but it follows a day that honestly has just been ridiculous. Look, we've rounded out summer now. We finished 4 weeks. Mad Lions and Rogue, you guys are currently tied in first place. Let's talk about the fact that the expectations coming into summer have continually been reset. Mac, you spoke extensively with Froskurinn and Dracos on Euphoria, and when I look at the standings here, tied for first, Mad and Rogue, tied for third, G2 Misfits, and then a 5-team stack for fifth. I mean, first of all, give me some context on all of this, and then let's dive a little deeper into Mad. I mean, why is the league so, I'm going to use the word competitive, albeit I know there's many elements of context we want to add here, Mac.
Sure, there are some connotations there. Honestly, I think that the teams that have, it's always the way at the beginning of the split, right? Some teams hit the ground running and some teams don't. I think I can only really speak for us as Mad Lions, but we've definitely maintained a really strong identity. And I think we're a team that's very well aware of what we're good at, and we just stuck to that. And compare that to some teams that have been experimenting a lot more, like you see in the first few weeks. If you go and look at the drafts, for example, of all of the things that different teams are picking, the variation from week to week is enormous. Like it's really huge. People do these huge 360s, from one day, from Friday to Saturday, in the way that they prioritize different champions in draft. And that kind of swinging happens a lot more drastically at the beginning of a split because people are finding their feet. I think we were fortunate and, in a sense, well prepared, kind of got a read on at least what we thought the meta was and what was strong for us very early on, and that helped us a lot.
I would love a team's opinion and your opinion on this idea of kind of like the sleeping giants. You hear it all the time from the broadcast side of things that, the benefit of the doubt is extended to the Fnatics and the G2s, and that eventually they'll wake up or turn to form, whatever buzzword you want to attach to it. And when we talk to the players, usually there is always respect given to G2 in particular, but can you kind of follow up on that side? Do you think that G2 and Fnatic, is this actually the death of the big top three and now we have the new generation, or do you expect G2 and Fnatic to come bouncing back?
I mean, it's really hard to say at this point. There's kind of not so much with G2, but Fnatic, there's always this weird tradition. I feel like I've heard it predicted so many times that they're going to miss playoffs or whatever it is because they had a few bad performances early on the split. They usually bounce back. I will say that I think that the kind of traditional, or if you look from spring split, like the third, fourth, fifth teams are stronger than they have been in the past. Whereas if you compare to 2 years ago, the fifth place team was usually really, really weak. I think the fifth place team in the league this split will actually be a pretty decent team. So I think that punishes inconsistency a lot more, right? Which is essentially what I was alluding to earlier when I said, that we've hit the ground running. we've just been really consistent this split, and there are a lot of teams that have been really inconsistent, and that's punished more heavily if you have a stronger third, fourth, fifth place team, which is the case here, I think.
Do you think the top end of the LEC is stronger right now than it was previously? So the Mad Lions and Rogue, I guess, if you're reading the scoreboard, or whoever you assume the top teams to be?
Define previously.
As in, are they stronger than G2 and Fnatic at their peak last split?
That's hard to say. I mean, I think last split is probably not the best split to compare with realistically. If you compare it to, for example, 2018, 2019, Europe was always like a kind of two-team region, you know? Even last year, I think the gap between us as Splice and G2 and Fnatic was pretty significant. Even if Fnatic didn't actually show up that well at Worlds, and you know we ended up finishing the same place, we still like got smacked by them in the gauntlet at the end of the day. So I think it's more just that the kind of power is more evenly distributed towards the top end of the table now, shall we say.
Oh, I really like that, because if it's more evenly distributed, but also maybe the absolute peak has come down, but then that fifth, sixth has come up, right? I like it. I do have to put you back on the spot though, Mac, because I don't think you technically answered Froskurinn's question. I think what she was asking was, are you afraid of Fnatic G2? And I'm going to make this easier, right? Mad Lions are currently the top dog. So I want to remove you from the equation. Should every other team except Mad Lions be afraid that G2 and Fnatic are going to wake up and join you, Mad Lions, at the top of the table? I think that's maybe a nice way to frame that, remove yourself from the equation. But like at the end of the day, it's one of the things that Fnatic and G2 have bought themselves years of confidence that they will. Do you feel the same? You're on the other side, you're one of their opponents, and what do you think the rest of the league thinks?
I think if you're Rogue and Origin, then yes, you should be afraid of that. Really short answer.
Oh, I really love that.
He
Okay,
just
I'm going to
murdered
dive into. Look, to be fair, I mean, Rogue was the only team today that did not lose in a surprising way. If we look at today's results, you know, Rogue were the only ones that took down SK Gaming, and then after that, Origin beaten by Vitality, Fnatic beaten by Schalke. Schalke's first win. XL take down G2, admittedly with a sub, and then Misfits, they smash Mad. I mean, Mac, why did we see so many surprises today? And why, like this weekend, was some of the gameplay a bit more, shall we say, Fiesta-like than in previous weeks?
Fiesta-like? Honestly, I can't answer that, realistically. I don't know why. I think that it's. I mean, in the past, there's always been this kind of phenomenon where it felt like that the top teams at the top of the region really pulled everyone else up, right? Like G2 and Fnatic really pulled everyone else up. Like myself personally as well, I learned the game from watching G2 and Fnatic, as well as like Chinese teams. But mostly G2 and Fnatic, because those are the teams that you're competing against. And suddenly, if they're having poor runs of form, then you don't have that same effect, right? Because in a league where you scrim G2 and you just get smashed, which is what happened previously every single year, or when you scrim Fnatic and you just get smashed like 5 games in a row, then you have a lot of feedback to take on board, and you're very conscious of the distance between you and the top, right? But if you're not getting that feedback consistently because the league overall is weaker, then it's a lot harder to realize, hey, this is what we're doing wrong, and this is what we need to improve on, and this is what the best teams will do to punish us if we make these mistakes, right? It's just about getting the amount of feedback necessary to improve on your mistakes and to identify that those are mistakes in the first place.
One of the big moving of the chains is naturally when we have international competition and we get to go overseas and face the big Eastern teams, the LPL in particular, and kind of take those learnings away of the time that you're scrimming at Worlds, the strategies that you pick up over the course of the tournament, and then bringing it back domestically and kind of building from there. Because this year didn't have MSI, do you think that the level of competition has been stunted slightly from that? Is this... I know we're still far away from Worlds, but I'm assuming that you watch the LPL. When you're comparing the two regions, do you feel confident in the LEC right now going into Worlds, or do you think that missing MSI is really going to hurt the region?
I mean, everyone missed MSI, right? I know that's not true. LCK and RPL had a tournament. So yeah, there's definitely an element of missing some international feedback there on what we think the best way to play the game is. For sure, that will have an impact. There's no question there. Am I worried about Europe performing well at Worlds this year? Probably not, unless you're really going to predict that one of the teams that goes to Worlds is not going to be, Fnatic and G2, then realistically those teams, assuming they make it, will usually turn up and have good performances. Like if you look at G2 this week, they lost to XL today, right? But for example, yesterday I thought like they played really, really, really well. And that's a kind of hallmark of players who, when things are bad and when they're in a bad situation because of things outside of their control, they have the ability to turn it on, right? And I felt like yesterday, not so much today, but yesterday, for example, Caps and Wunder really turned it on in that game. And I think that that's something that you would also see at an international tournament at the end of this year, even if the regular season was a bit rougher.
I'm very excited to see what happens when we get towards Worlds, because of course Europe's going to have 4 contestants. Just before I talk a little bit about the playoffs and how maybe the second half of summer is going to play out, one of the first things that I actually wanted to do during this discussion with you, Mac, was celebrate you, your organization, your players. The Mad Lions have really taken charge here in Europe. And you said something that really caught my eye. Like, if you're constantly being skill checked by G2 and Fnatic, constantly being smashed in scrims, you know the gap, right? Now, if that's not happening the whole time, there's this opportunity for you to define how to lead. And this split in particular, Mac, the Mad Lions have just taken off. You've won the hearts and minds of fans and viewers at home. You have surprised us consistently week on week. Maybe not the gigantic swings, right? But you're doing it in your own way. You seem to be finding a voice on the Rift as well as social media. What is it like for somebody who has sort of been in the shadows a long time, yourself personally, and now for, all of the spotlight, all of the hype, all of the celebration, but also all of the expectation, because now you are the number one, now you've suffered this big loss, right? What does this do to you and everybody else?
I was really worried coming into my first split as a head coach about the pressure and the expectations and whether or not I would be able to deal with it. I think stress takes a big toll on me as a person. But fortunately, we have really good people around us and like an infrastructure we built up over a long time that supports us. I think the level of fan engagement and all of the positive energy coming from the fans this split has been absolutely amazing. So that's been wonderful. And thank you from all of us at Mad Lions for all the amazing messages that we've received and all the shout outs on Twitter and all this type of stuff. It's been really amazing and really fun. And I think that our players also deserve a bit of a shout out for that, because they're so much fun. And that's part of the reason why this team is so lovable and why I love this team so much, is because this is just the nicest environment I've ever been on, right? Like for a first team to coach as a head coach, at least at this level, it's been really amazing. They're all super easy to work with, really creative, really fun to be around. Like, this is by far the nicest team atmosphere I've ever worked in. And I think that we owe a large part of our success to that.
That is so wholesome. I love hearing that.
It really
Matt,
is.
I do have to ask you, if this was a best of 3, would you have banned the fiddlesticks, or would you have run it back and tried to play around it?
I think when that happens, you ban the fiddlesticks, right?
I appreciate the honesty. Look, we only have a few minutes left before we do need to move on.
My players would tell me not to ban the fiddlesticks, actually, now that I think about it.
They're like, there's no way he's going to teleport behind us 2 times.
But then who would get the final say? Okay, so Shadow's saying to you, I can beat it, I can outplay it, and you're like, in that scenario, I'm going to ban it. Who gets final say, Mac?
It depends what type of composition we want to run for the second game, like what side we're on and things like that. And it also depends if,
I wanted the flame. I wanted the this is my call. And this is just, you're too wholesome.
Get back in your cage.
Too wholesome.
Back in your cage. It would depend how much information Shadow had on it, right? Because this game where they blind pick fiddle like that, we're just kind of there, like scratching our heads, like, so what are you picking to fiddle?
I guess Gragas is good here.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
So, I don't think it was that good in the end. I don't think that Gragas was necessarily the problem in the draft, but
Definitely
realistically, if
way.
the draft had run back again, like if I had the chance to do this draft again, I don't think much would realistically change. So it would depend a lot on what Shadow's answer was. If he's like, I'm 100% sure I can play this champion. Like, if this guy wants to cheese me, I'm going to counter cheese him and I'm going to show him. Like, if he's 100% sure, then sure. I trust him, for sure.
He's got like a Mobifier pulled up. He's checking the wiki links.
I mean, yeah, pretty much. Yeah, knowing Shadow, it would be like, yeah, of course, like, I don't know, Rengar is good here,
I
or
love
something really
this.
random like that.
I love this
But,
so
yeah.
much. Mac, can I move us along really quickly before we start heading to the LCS? But I want to talk a little bit just about the race for playoffs. Right now, we have 9 teams that do legitimately feel like they're in the race. Let's be a little bit more specific. There's 2 teams that feel locked right now. You guys and Rogue are in a very safe spot. You got a couple of wins on everyone else. Schalke just picked up a win, so I initially, coming into this day, was ready to kind of throw them out the boat. But now with 1 win, the fact they're only 3 behind the pack, I mean, what do you think about when we look at this race for players? There's 9 games left, and truthfully, any single team in the LEC can qualify.
It's going to be really, really, really tight. I mean, with us and Rogue looking fairly solid for playoffs at the moment, you have to assume that G2 and Fnatic are going to make playoffs, which means there's only 2 spots left for Misfits, SK, Vitality, and Origin. That's really tough. So, without wanting to make any real predictions, because I don't know. Frankly, I don't know.
This is definitely not a time for predictions. This is definitely not a time for predictions. It's just
absolutely
the different elements go a 1 week break, then it's 4 weeks of games, and like there's no room for mistakes at the other end of summer.
For sure. I mean, I think I like to say to our players that the teams that make it through to the end of summer and the teams that end up making it to Worlds are the ones that like manage to not implode, generally speaking, because the closer you get to playoffs and the closer you get to the last week, the higher the stress ramps up, right? And you know, as a person working every single day in really close proximity with other people who, I mean, maybe you don't have that great a relationship with some of your teammates. You know, not all people get on instinctively, and not all working environments are like super well managed, but seeing someone next to you making the same mistakes every single week for 9 weeks, that's really hard if it's not addressed properly and if it's not managed properly. And if that is the case, then teams tend to implode, and that makes it really easy for the rest of the teams to make playoffs at the end.
Classic
I'm
Vedius.
so excited to see what happens. Yeah, I'm excited to see what happens on the other side of the break. Just one last thing before I do let you go to celebrate the first half and tied for first, Mac. It's the Kia Player of the Game leaderboard. Patrick's currently in first, followed by Caps, and then Humanoid. It is important to note that in the event of ties, the player with the largest percentage of votes comes out on top. Mac, how important is winning player of the game to your team and to your players? It is a bit of a joke. It's not something people take very seriously, of course, but there is some bragging rights in it. So what is it like in the Mad Lions camp?
There is certainly some bragging rights. I mean, I think Marek, Humanoid that is pretty happy to be up there for sure. I think Kazi feels a bit hard done by because he's played so many Senna games this split. And Kaiser has been there on the Wukong and things like that.
So that's your fault.
It's been pretty hard for him to get players. Yeah, pretty much.
Oh, amazing. Okay, let's take a look at the schedule really quickly. Frosk, I want you to chime in on this. We will have a break week next week. We'll continue the LEC on Friday the 17th of July. Mad Lions take on G2, a rematch of the week 1 defeat of the Mad Lions. It is a huge clash as the current top team versus the reigning champions, the most successful European org ever. Frosk, what's your take on this game?
My take is, how is that not our match of the week?
We'll have that discussion later. This is not for public consumption, but please generate some hype for the fans and viewers.
Okay.
I think that's a very good point here.
Normally our match of the week is on the day too, and I'm like, oh, we have Mad Lions and G2 in that week, and that's not going to be the match of the week? Okay. Super hype.
So,
it's our top
I tell you what
team
we'll do.
versus the Sleeping Beast.
I tell you what we'll do. This is the match of the week that we wanted to be. No, it's just we've just incited fans to have a discussion that we can have. I'm having as well. Mac,
please, no.
we do just have a very last thing. Do you have any shout outs for fans and viewers at home? I just want to say thank you so much. I love listening to you on Euphoria. I have loved watching what you've done at the Mad Lions all throughout 2020. I cannot wait to see where this journey ends. But I'm going to just completely throw any speculation out the window. I want to see Mad Lions at Worlds, so you better make it happen. Give a shout out to the fans before we wrap out the day.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks so much to all the fans for supporting us. It's been really, really amazing for us and all of our players. Like the support and all of the positive emotion and everything coming out of everywhere seemingly recently has been absolutely wonderful. Also want to give a big shout out to all of our support staff who aren't necessarily in the limelight. Jake, our performance manager, Martina, our sports psychologist, Judo, our analyst, even Cass, our assistant coach, who, I mean, having been in his position, I understand that you don't get much props, but they're all doing really fantastic work, and we couldn't be the team that we are without them. So thank you very much, everyone, for supporting us.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Froskurinn. Look, you're 100% right. When you're right, you're right. That does it from us here in the LEC. Across in the Atlantic, Golden Guardians versus TSM is about to start. We will be back in 2 weeks for more League of Legends action. Good night. See you then. That was fantastic, Matt. Thank you so much.